Hi, so the next book I want to talk about is Hugo Caberet, and this book is like very interesting because it's a lot different from the other books that we've read in that there's a lot of pictures and text at the same time, which I feel like really adds to the book in that it kind of makes it seem like a children's book, but it also like gives you that element where you kind of can just like piece together what's happening with the text. So it saves a lot of time and like that they don't have to really explain the setting and certain things that they could just use pictures for instead. Also, along with that whole idea that it's a childlike book, which is really interesting because Hugo Cabret, the main character in the book, is, he's not really like, physically and obviously like age-wise he is a child, but like what he goes through, the fact that he lives on his own, he lives like underground, and he like fixes clocks, he steals. Those are all like things that kids don't usually do, and we don't really see kids doing that in children's books. So it's kind of like a dichotomy between the text and like what it seems to be and like what's actually the case. An example in the book, I believe there's a picture in which one of the man's hands is getting like cut off, and there's a very vivid picture of that happening, and that just like shows how this kind of like takes away from it being a children's book because it's something you wouldn't put in a children's book. Like somebody's hand being sawed off is obviously not something that you would want to see in a children's book for children to read. But one of the main things that can be debated in this book is like the idea of stealing. He does steal, but it's kind of like, can you justify it? Because like the reasons that he steals for can be debated. Like, for an example, in the beginning of the book, when he tries to steal the mouse thing, he's stealing it for the automaton, which is something that he's like, it's a work in progress throughout the book that he's trying to make and trying to figure out because that's what his father left for him. And so, like, the reasons for his stealing are, like, I guess justifiable just because, like, he's doing this for something, like, he has really nothing else from his father other than this automaton, so it's obviously meaningful to him, and so he has to steal it because he's kind of on his own in terms of things like that. And if we look at the sorry, that was my doing a vlog. Another thing that we can see in this book is the idea that he kind of lives independently, like I mentioned before, and it's different from the George Melas, which is the elder character that we learn more about. He's the shop owner, he's a shopkeeper, so we learn more about him later on, and it's different because George is kind of like, he keeps himself away from society, just like Hugo, but in the way that like he's afraid of showing his identity. He doesn't want people to know that he's still alive. He kind of shunned all of his career, and Hugo is trying to like build up his career and like kind of recover that. So we can see Hugo and George as being sort of like counterparts in a very broad sense, because they're obviously not entirely like completely correlated throughout the entire book. But other than that, if we talk about, take a gender criticism of this book, we can see that the girl in the book is like a really good friend of Hugo's, and she is very bold in that, like, in one part of the book she steals back Hugo's book from her grandfather, which is like something that was really bold of her, considering that, the conventional view of like women and like girls are kind of like inferior towards elder men such as George. So just seeing how like she had the audacity to steal that book was really interesting, because it just shows how she's more bold than George, and she's more daring, and obviously more daring than Hugo, because Hugo didn't have the guts to steal it back. So that just shows how the gender roles are sort of switched if we compare it to conventional society. And another thing that I wanted to touch on is that Hugo Cabret is sort of a retelling, in that it's kind of, we see it as a children's book, and it's sort of like if we look at it as a children's book, it's a retelling, because like it has all the elements of a children's book, like a little kid, like a love story sort of, except the kid is a stealer, and he lives on his own and stuff like that, which would obviously be the retelling part. But overall, this book was really interesting, especially because it had pictures, which really added to the book, because, it wasn't like the monotonous, like, description of, the setting and stuff, and it was sort of like a movie, so I really enjoyed it.